and welcome to a painfully slow and shaky edition of Ben's Junk. Through no fault of my own, of course. Did you think I was about to commit blasphemy there? Well, of course, last week we did our little tribute to silent film for International Silent Movie Day. And one piece of gear that I was gonna use to run a couple of bits from my own 8 and Super 8mm film stash wound up falling by the wayside. This thing. So what we got here is, at least in the market value sense, the single greatest thrift store score I've had since I've lived here. Which you will not be seeing on archive thrifting because I found it on that one day I forgot my smartphone. But obviously I left the price tag on it. And this is the Wolverine Moviemaker Pro 8mm and Super 8 film scanner. I picked it up for the princely sum of $10. To put that in perspective, these currently go for $400 new on Amazon, and the used price ain't much better. So, of course, for $10, I was going to pick this thing up, working or not, good, bad, indifferent, if nothing else, just so I could have a poke around. Now, of course, we do 8mm stuff periodically on Archive, and yeah, I'm always looking for ways to do the odd transfer, but honestly, I had no real intentions of ever buying one of these, for 3 reasons. Reason number 1, and the dominant reason, there is no sound support. Now, obviously, I wouldn't expect a scanner explicitly to do sound, but you'd hope there would be some kind of way that you could do a separate run through the machine just for sound and then work with it later. But obviously that's not going to happen. And then when half your 8mm film collection, especially Super 8, has magnetic sound, that means if I want sound, I would have an absolute nightmare on my hands, trying to take a separate pass at the film with a regular projector, peeling off the audio from it, and trying to, especially for anything with dialogue, resync it with the video. And of course, in the analog realm, nothing ever plays exactly the same way twice. So, yeah, the editing would just be off the charts. Now, reason number 2, with an automated scan, as far as I know, there is no manual option here, at least nothing mentioned in the manual. But, with an automated scan, there is not much room for error, especially for a not-so-professional piece of gear like this. I mean, yeah, $400 is not cheap, but a professional rig will go into the 5 figures just for a scanner. And as such, I wasn't expecting, and as it turns out rightly so, much forgiveness from this thing for a bad splice or any kind of film shrinkage. And then lastly, reason number 3, there's no comic book characters in here, but it says Wolverine on the box. False advertising. Anyway, let me take a cut here. I'll open this up and we'll start taking a look at it. I would love to know the backstory of this particular unit, because somebody included a small stack of hand-labeled amateur photos of the unit, just printed off the computer. And I'm guessing that this might have been a gift to someone at some point to, transfer their films. And I'm guessing it intimidated that person, and it just wound up going to Goodwill. Either that or somebody died. That's also known to be the Goodwill way. And I've already gone through most of the pictures, so I guess I'll just finish it up here. 8 pictures. But anyway, I came up with that theory, or those theories, because in part, the cables still had those fresh machine-tied twist ties on them, and the cables themselves were just perfect, and the protective plastic is actually still there on the minuscule screen. And the only thing that ever got moved was the protective piece of blue tape over the main scanner. And all they did was just move it to the top of the unit. And I haven't moved it myself. As far as I know, I don't need to put it back. I don't know if I'm going to try to. But I'm just holding on to it for now. But anyway, I was quite pleasantly surprised with this in that this is mostly a solid metal device and that it's direct drive all around. So no belts here. And there's also a nice neat diagram to help you with the threading and the rewinding and written instructions for threading and rewinding. And I'm going to go right out of the shot when I put this up, but this will accommodate up to 9-inch reels. I've only got 3, 5, and 7 inchers in my possession, but if I ever do come across any 9 inchers, well, I guess I'm prepared now. And even in the Goodwill condition, all the necessary adapters and cables were included. The only thing missing would be an SD card. And here's one of the quirks of this thing. It won't take anything above a 32 gigabyte SD card. And of course, over the last 2 years, old Benny Boy has gone over to all 64 and 128 gig cards. So I actually had to dig out my old camcorder, the one I used from 2013 to 19, stole the 8 gig card I always kept in there, and I guess it's going to be living with this thing now. But anyway, it's not plugged in right now, and you'll see it later, but it's got a reasonably easy to follow on-screen menu. There are a couple of minor quirks, but you get used to it fairly quickly. And let's see, let's jump to the back here. And I'm going to have to move this around so the light hits it just right. But in order, we've got a, I think, micro USB slot. And there is software on this, but it's not necessarily to go to the computer. You know, there's no drivers or anything. But what it is it allows the unit to act as an intermediary between the SD card and the computer. So if your computer doesn't have an SD card slot in it, you can just plug this in. Then we've got an 1/8 inch jack, and that's so you can plug in a supplied 1/8 inch to composite video cable. No HDMI support here. And of course we got the SD card slot and the power adapter slot, whatever you want to call it. All right, let's take another cut and we'll discuss some issues that I had. When I was working on the silent movie episode, I, given the occasion, decided to give this a spin. And I hadn't planned on recording any of that process. Well, it took me 3 tries to get this thing going decently. And then about a minute or 2 into the transfer process, it started making some pretty unnerving noises. And then it just seized up completely. So I wound up just whipping out my phone to try and record any mishaps and keep it at the ready. And I wound up shooting a fair amount of admittedly rather poor footage, but I will cut away to it here as needed. So anyway, for one reel of, save for my attached leader, splice-free, good condition, no known shrinkage, all-around good, strong piece of late 50s, early 60s standard 8 film, which has already appeared on Archive no less, it took me a little over 3 hours with 22 film seizures along the way to get a rather wobbly pass at a 5-inch, call it 200-foot reel. I don't know the exact footage. Plus another hour to cut together those disparate pieces into something resembling the original roughly 11-minute film, if it were played at the proper silent 18 frames per second. And worse yet, there was no common thread to these errors. Sometimes the film would jump off the track, sometimes the machine would just stop for no apparent reason. And to boot, the manual and website, wolverinedata.com, do not mention anything about maybe possibly treating the film first, maybe a little film guard on it. I didn't do anything with the film because I wasn't sure. And really, the only pointers they give pertain to late period double 8 film, so split 16mm film, which I don't think I own any of. I think all my standard 8 stuff predates that. And as far as I know, they never used that style for Super 8. But yeah, needless to say, I wound up abandoning this whole part of that episode. So anyway, let's take another cut, and I will try and give you a real-time taste of using this thing. All right, full disclosure here. This is my second attempt at this whole sequence. The version I shot of this a couple of days ago, which you will never see, I have deemed to be just outdated and wrong. But that's largely because I tried another little experiment with this thing, and it's really cut down on the errors on the machine's part. So what I did was, I'll splice this into this segment, but if you open up the film guide, there's a metal plate with a spring underneath and 2 screws holding that whole thing down. And I just started working the spring a bit, and I ever so slightly loosened those screws, like an eighth of a turn, quarter of a turn at most. Just like the instant you start to feel it move, that's enough. But it's made it a lot more forgiving to the film that I've been running through here, and I'll discuss that more in a bit. But anyway, to thread this up, and I'll splice in my existing footage, you're going to have to manhandle the film, and you're going to be manhandling the film a lot, to the point where I was getting nice big nasty fingerprints on it, so hence getting all nice and clinical with it. So anyway, to load it up, there are 3 guides, metal pins, whatever you want to call them, along the track. You'll want to start with the center, sliding your film into the center hole, slot, whatever you want to call it. And then you're going to have to twist the film 90 degrees on the left side and then fit it back down underneath the guide, and do the same thing on the right-hand side. And make sure you have enough give on both ends of your setup so you can run through all the pins. So as for the film that's on here, this is, well, I guess I ought to turn on the TV, and the Wolverine for that matter. What we got here is my truly venerable Black Hawk Films Preview 8 Super 8 silent reel from 1968. And this is what I consider to be one of my bad reels. I don't remember if this was my first Super 8 film. If it wasn't, it was real close. But it has been the subject of every possible rookie mistake a person could make. As such, it has got some splices in it, some not so great ones. It's got some torn sprocket holes in places. It's got some folds in some places. And actually, I've got the box here, and if I shake it around, you can hear the ghosts of all my past mistakes with it. I should really fleabay another one of these, try and find like a new old stock one just to have it. But anyway, if the film were not in here, I've also found that just in running this a few times now, that it is very prone to crap buildup. And it comes with one of those little squeezy rubber deals where it just lets out a tiny amount of air when you squeeze on it. And that does not cut it. So what you're going to want to clean with is just normal old canned air, and just a little piece of lens cloth, especially for the mirror that's down in there. It's especially prone to junk buildup. But yeah, it's not a tough clean by any stretch of the imagination. So anyway, let's start getting into the settings here. So I have found that I have to intentionally undershoot the exposure and overshoot the sharpness. So I've got this a whole step lower than the factory default, and it's still a tad blown out. So actually I may just, because I can, just try it at another half step down. So I hit menu, we'll select the appropriate thing. Let's try it at a step and a half down. And as I mentioned, you'll want the sharpness all the way up. 8 and Super 8 tend to be a bit soft. And even though this will record at 1080p, and I think there is a 720 setting if you're willing to dig in there, but you'll want the 1080. And I think it's a fairly compressed 1080. I mean, a 10-minute chunk of film would be 10-minute chunk of film is about 900 megabytes. So whatever that works out to in terms of data compression, it's not very good. Having said that, it's not bad. I haven't been getting real nasty artifact-laden transfers with this. So anyway, just to compensate for the basic softness of 8 and Super 8, you'll want the sharpness on high. And actually, let's just go back to the home screen there and see how that looks. All right. So it saved my framing from last time around, but let's just mess around with that framing just so you can see what's going on. And it'll become more apparent once you get into the actual first scene of whatever film that you're running. If anything, you'll want to do a bit of a dry run first, so you can get into that first scene and then you can really lock in what you want for the frame placement. But anyway, frame adjustment. So you can move along the x-axis, left to right, y, up and down, and w, which is zoom. So it's set for x by default, and let's just start dinking around with this so it goes completely off. So you can see the sprocket holes off to the left there. So let's try and dial that back in, and there is a bit of a delay, so if you start mashing the button, expect it to keep running for a while. So let's move the frame down a click. That might work. And actually, you know what, let's intentionally screw it up so you can see what it looks like way off. Let's get it back up to, I believe it was 15. Oh, it went right past it. See what I mean about getting a little overzealous? Okay, and I'll just quick demo the zoom function. Zoom in, zoom out. So we'll try that. We'll try and get as much of the proper frame as we can here. Now, also before I start, I should also note that this ain't no Ron Popeil sort of thing. It's not one of those rotisseries. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. You're going to be babysitting this sucker. And a good rule of thumb seems to be for every 100 feet of film, you're looking at about 75 minutes. And once you factor in any screw-ups, and drift will occur, no matter how good the film is. You're going to have to stop at some point, rewind a bit, reframe it, and try it again, and then cut it back together on the computer. Once you factor that in, call it 1.25 to 1.5 times that 75 minutes per 100 feet. Now, this is an overstuffed 200-foot reel. Even with my cuts over the years, I think it's still somewhere in the 210 range. So you'll have to factor that in. The one that I was really experimenting with is on a 200-foot reel, but I think it's only about 160. But that's me really going off into the weeds here. So anyway, let's just get this started, and I'll keep talking about it so you can finally see what this looks like in action. We've already had it set to Super 8, so we're good. And there we go. You can actually see the sprocket holes very faintly off to the left. Well, maybe not from that camera angle, but I can anyway. So let's go over some more stuff. There is no way to pause a session. There is no way to really truly stop a session. You just have to hold down the power button until everything shuts off. And if a jam occurs, you just have to live with it. It will just shut everything down for you. And yeah, there's very little control, and that is kind of a complaint I have. I would love so much for this to have some sort of manual feature for the more screwed up stuff. But I guess that's just not in the cards, or if there's a way to do it, maybe it has to be modded. And I'm trying to keep things out of the box here. I feel like I'm cheating already by playing with the spring a bit. So anyway, once you do finally get through your entire reel, I would recommend, if at all possible, rewinding it on a normal projector, if you've got one, because the rewind on this thing is hopeless. It's slower than real time. This is, I think, a 13-minute reel, so it's probably between 15 and 18 to rewind, in my experience anyway. So let's see here. Once you get this into the computer, you're going to want to hopefully have access to something a little older, or just try and download an older version of whatever easy thing like Windows Movie Maker or iMovie, but so that it will handle 4:3 aspect ratio, because the newer stuff, especially for something, kind of stupid from the big tech companies like iMovie, will try and either stretch it out artificially to widescreen 16:9, or it will zoom in and make an artificial widescreen out of that. So yeah, I'm just gonna let this run for a bit. I won't make you watch, but I'm just gonna let it go, see if my fix is holding up. I'll let it run through the first error. Actually, I've got the first error coming right here. You might not see it, but there's a fold and a splice right in here. So let's see if it handles it. Last time I did this, it drifted off a bit, but it mostly corrected itself. So here's the splice. Not bad. Not bad. And it sounds like it corrected itself. It's ticking away just right. And this is, I believe, 2 frames per second that it transfers at. So you can do your math that way. Probably better than my own kind of basic stupid Benny Boy math. Anyway, like I said, let me just shut up for a while. We'll let this run. We'll see if we encounter any problems. Well, this has been running for about 20 minutes now, and I haven't had any chokes or anything. And so I think I'm comfortable with giving my closing thoughts on this. Now, having said that, if you look at the very top of the screen here, we are experiencing a little bit of drift. So normally this would be the point where I'd be waiting for some sort of camera cut. I'd be turning this off, rewinding a touch and resetting the film, and then picking back up and giving myself a nice edit point to work with later on. But I'm not going to do that right now. It just wouldn't be practical. And I've already transferred this one. So anyway, let me give those final thoughts here. When this works properly, after my little tweaks, I've gotten the best transfers I've ever gotten of standard or Super 8 film using this device. Now, having said that, I'm going to stop just 1% short of recommending this to anyone but real film hobbyists. I don't know if I would want a true amateur using this. It helps immensely if you have some knowledge, working knowledge of film. So I think there's a lot more that could go wrong with the amateurs. Now, having said that, if you are a hobbyist, I hope you have a lot of patience and a lot of free time, because you're going to be spending some quality time with this sucker. And you're also still going to be beating your head against the wall to some degree. Like I said, we got the drift going on. Things just happen with this. So you just have to be prepared to go with it. And I can't imagine anybody getting a successful pass at any decent-sized reel of film in one shot. I think everybody's going to wind up having to deal with the jam or just simply shut it off themselves a few times over the course of that transfer. So I would also say that I would not recommend running anything too precious to you through this. And I definitely would not recommend running anything with any kind of noticeable decay going on. So even if it's just vinegar syndrome, I wouldn't run it through this. And I've got some family films with vinegar syndrome, actually. That sort of thing, I would still recommend finding a good, reputable professional to send it off to, and not some, crappy company like, what is that called? Memory Box, something like that. Find somebody that actually knows what they're doing. You're going to pay for it, but you'll get it done right. But yeah, this is just so tantalizingly close to a winner. And I guess what I want to say with this is there's two models of this. This is the current higher end model, and I'm hoping there's a third one sometime. And I would hope that they include some sort of manual feature so you can navigate more damaged stuff if you need to. I'd love to see some kind of sound support. I mean, obviously, something working in tandem with scanners not really going to work, but something that could run to a clock, a good reliable clock, and that you could sync back up. And otherwise, then I would be a lot quicker to recommend this, even to amateurs, real amateurs. And I am a bit of an amateur. My background's more in videotape, and audio tape too, for that matter. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is it for me on the vocal front for today. I will leave you with a couple of excerpts, one Standard 8, one Super 8, and if the YouTube gods will allow it, I will post them in their entirety to Archive Annex for your perusal. But otherwise, yeah, I will talk to you again soon.